Hi again, it's Isha here, and with this series on economics, we will be covering the major topics that are current. And through this, the idea is that we will try and cover the basics related to those topics. This series is not targeted to actually make you, the experts in economics, because for UPSC you need to be a jack of all trades and not exactly a master in each one of them. So we will not be very pedagogical and try to teach you everything that is there related to the economics concepts. But what we are trying to achieve through this series is to take up the current and most pressing issues in the economic sphere right now in the country and even around. And then through those issues, we will probably try and explain to you the connected topics so that they are more relevant to you rather than you trying to mug up the economics textbooks and the concepts which directly do not appear in the pre or the mains paper for general studies. At least that's been my experience as well as of my students. So basis that, we will so far be covering with the current topics. The most pressing topic that I think these days is the currency crisis. Even I have faced a problem with that because of the exchange rate falling, the depreciation of the currency. And that's where the problem started for me. Like a lot of my students, and even at places like Quora, where I'm actively writing answers and articles, I realized that there were questions like, why can't 1 rupee be equal to $1? Or what is it that why is it people are calling that the rupee is depreciating when the economy is growing? The problem that I felt really was that people do not even understand at this point that what is an exchange rate, what does it do, what appreciation means, what depreciation means. So, starting from that point of understanding, taking absolutely a layman sort of an approach, what this video tries to do is first lay down what really currency is, the currency markets are. I will not be going too deep into it to become to make you really experts in currency trading here. That's not the intent, but deep enough so that you at least understand what the currency markets are going through. Why is there a havoc? For you to understand that what is happening in the currency markets right now, I would probably through this video try and develop an understanding of what those markets really are and how do they function. And in the subsequent video, we will be covering the current crisis of currency, how is it affecting the economy, a few of the related topics, obviously, and the Turkish crisis, like how is it really leading to a further dip in the current currency markets, especially for emerging economies. So let's start with what it is. Uh, the first question, obviously, when we talk about a currency crisis, is what really is a currency? So as you can see in this map out here, it's actually a world map that is giving out for different countries. There is a mode of exchange. Like when we moved from a barter system, there were different systems evolved because the earlier systems, like let's say a barter system or a gold standard, they had problems. I mean, for any exchange between two people who wants one thing that belongs to someone else, that is with someone else, there has to be some sort of a common denominator to actually give a value attached to those goods. So in a normal exchange, when you are just bartering, you cannot really put a value to those goods. Like, is really a car more important or an apple? For somebody, food might be more important. For someone else, it's luxuries. So you need to have a monetary value or some sort of value attached to it, which is common. That's when, with time, in due course, like over a couple of 100 years, currency evolved. And presently, every country has got its own currency, as you can see in the map in here. Like, most of the different countries have their own currencies, other than few which take another country's currency, that's called as a peg. And either they have their personal currency and they attach it to some other currency that, okay, we'll keep it fixed to, let's say, a Chinese yuan is fixed to a dollar, or if I want to say that Indian rupee, I'll fix it to the dollar. So with the way dollar moves, my currency will also move. So it is dollar dependence. And some countries might adopt dollar as their own currency. just like euro is happening as a composite currency across Europe. So multiple countries might have a single currency or different currencies. The basic idea is that it is a medium for exchange. It's just a paper which like a bearer bond, and it gives you a way to purchase goods, sell them, or services. And this I'm talking of within a country. Like every country has got its own currency. The problem, or actually what we are trying to discuss here, will start when we go international, like one currency versus another currency. So, yeah, as I just mentioned, it's a common denominator for valuation of a good inside a country. It has evolved past multiple systems because they had their own challenges. I'm not going to deep into the challenges because otherwise the topic is just going to go into the past. The big question now, how do you compare a currency of one country versus another? Because every country has got its own system. I have these number of, different goods, services, and I have my own currency where people are exchanging goods and services. When you go outside, it's someone else's currency. They have their own system, and that currency might not be, seeing eye to eye with your currency. They might be good at something else. For example, India might be having a lot of apples, so they might not value so much the apples. They might value it pretty low, like 2 rupees per apple or 1 rupee per apple. This is just an example. Don't consider really that this is what the rate is. While let's say in some other country, for example, let's say Uzbekistan, they do not produce any apples, so it might be a really precious thing for them. So in their currency, it might be very expensive. So the idea is, how do you compare the currencies? Yeah, before I talk about currency comparisons, like how does a currency value come up, what do you mean by currency appreciation, depreciation? I know it's a very naive and a simple question, but a lot of people that I have come across do not understand what appreciation and depreciation mean. So let's say this is our baseline. I would say that 1 USD is equals to 60 INR. What this means is that if you want to purchase 1 US dollar, you will have to pay 60 rupees to whichever is the agency. It could be Thomas Cook, you might be taking it to a bank for an exchange, or a private dealer, whoever you're going to. This, let's say, is the baseline, and this is what is the rate accordingly in the television that has been publicized. At least it was a year or so back. With this baseline, if the baseline is such that if it moves in a direction that you say that now you have to pay 55 rupees to a USD, so this means that the rupee has appreciated while the dollar has depreciated, because you pay lesser to get $1, which means that there is clearly, uh, you know, your currencies become expensive. Like for $1, if someone is giving $1 in the country, that person would only get 55 rupees, so that they can buy lesser of goods. So your currency has become slightly dearer. It's become important. So like it's like there is more demand of your currency, which is why it has become. It's just appreciated. On the other hand, if it is what is the current rate right now, 1 US dollar is giving 74 rupees, which means that for someone who's coming from US, for $1 that they pay, they'll be getting 74 rupees. However, if you are going outside, you'll have to give 74 rupees to get just $1. Earlier, it might have been 55 rupees or 60 rupees. So obviously, you have depreciated. You have reduced your own value because you're going to get lesser of dollars and the same amount of money. However, USD, the dollar, has appreciated. It has become costlier if you purchase. So here, rupee is less in demand, which is why dollar is obviously more in demand, and so there is a depreciation. The other question that I usually face, I'm just trying to address it here, that can 1 rupee really be equals to $1 or €1? And if not, then why not? So this particular question actually leads us to the whole definition of what currency markets are and how do they really move. Like why can't be 1 rupee or 1 real equals to $1 or maybe €1 or pound sterling? Why can't they really be equal? So because we are comparing between currencies, there is not an apple to apple comparison, because every country has got a different economy, the set of products that they produce, their challenges, and that is somewhere defined by the currency. So the currencies are first, obviously, they are transacted through an exchange. So what you see as the currency is like a share of the country. This is kind of an analogy that I would want to give so that you people remember what currency is. If you think of a company, you would buy a share. That share is dependent on the valuation of the company, the earnings of the company, the kind of confidence you have, the products that they produce, a lot of things on which that value of that particular share is dependent on about that company. Similar is the currency. It's the value of your economy. What is your growth potential? What is the current size? Then, I mean, how are the other countries just similar to you performing? Is there a real downturn expected across them? It's like an industry benchmarking that you might do. And your internal factors, how are compliance, regulations, etc. in your own company, what all policies are you having? So that really you can have almost a one-on-one comparison between a company and a country here. So a company gives out its shares while a country has its currency in the external market to whoever is trying to buy that. So as you can see here, there are internal factors as well as external factors. And the way we will proceed is that for all these factors which I lay down here for valuation of the currency, we will be going through each one of them in just slight more detail so you understand that how the currency is getting affected. So that whenever you come across that is this factor related to a currency appreciation or depreciation, you just automatically know what is really happening. So let's start. Okay, so the first factor that I mentioned in this particular slide was that size and PPP of an economy. PPP is purchasing power parity. So this is a simple one. So for example, in this chart, if you would see, size of US is close to 20 trillion. This value on the left hand side is trillion dollars. So size of US is around 20 trillion dollars. China is 12. India somewhere 2.5. So you can clearly see that the bigger the country is, the bigger will be its share price. So the higher will be its currency value. It's also for a company. The larger you are, the more valuation you have, the more is going to be your share price. Just like TCS is going to have a bigger share price than some small IT company. So that's the same case here. So the size of the country is somewhere defining that, okay, this is going to have a higher value. So a dollar might just be more costly than a rupee. Like a USD is not equals to a rupee. A USD might be equal to 10, 20, 40, 50, 60 rupees because they are that big. And the second part is obviously purchasing power. So you may give 70 rupees in here for a meal. Out there you may not get it in 70 rupees, like 1 USD is 70, so in 1 USD you may not even get a meal. So purchasing power is also different for people here and there. One person might survive an entire day on 70 rupees there, that is 1 USD, 74 rupees. There they may not really survive on it. So the purchasing power parity is also a factor. I'm not going too deeply into it because it's slightly an economical term and it may directly not be asked. Indirectly, you can just understand that PVP is different and it plays a role in deciding the currencies. Higher is the purchasing power in a country, more is going to be the value of that currency. In the next part, we are going to discuss on the kind of exchange rates that are there. So it's going to be on the fixed. So in fixed exchange rate, what happens is that a country fixes their currency, as I was mentioning earlier also, that for example, Chinese renminbi. So they would fix their currency to either a basket of currencies or to a dollar. Presently, it's actually pegged to a basket of around 20 currencies. So they fix a value with those 20 currencies, and whenever that basket moves is the same direction which that currency also moves. While in a floating or sort of a flexible exchange rate, what India follows, we are not moving in sync with where the dollar is going. We are moving to the dynamics in the market of demand and supply. So the difference is that if someone might, I mean, the total demand of the Chinese currency might not be as much as the dollar, but since it's pegged to a dollar, it'll move in the same direction. This is an example. However, as I just mentioned, Chinese renminbi is pegged to 20 currencies. It's a basket that's pegged to. But then, how do they really value their currency? I mean, in a fixed exchange, also, if the demand is not commensurate to the value in which it is moving, the direction in where it is moving to a dollar or the basket where it is fixed, so how does the dynamic work? So in that case, there is a devaluation in case there is less of demand of that currency. That is a decision which is not taken by the market forces, but yes, it is a consequence of what the market is trying to tell the country. For example, it really becomes a big issue when China finally says that, okay, we will devalue our currency because there isn't so much of a demand. There is a requirement for them to devalue their currency, but that is a demand and that is a call that Chinese central bank is going to take, just like Indian RBI. However, in the case of India here, since the market is free flowing, it is dynamic, the market forces only decide. So if there is more demand of Indian currency, the price is going to go higher, which means that it will appreciate. If there is less demand, it's going to appreciate. So that is the major difference between a fixed and a floating exchange rate. In a fixed exchange rate, the central bank decides the value and where it will be going, whether they will devalue it or they will appreciate it. While in the floating exchange rate, it's the market that decides the value. So it happens automatically. It's an automatic adjustment. In a fixed exchange rates, as I mentioned earlier as well, that it is done by the central bank, while here in the floating rate, it's by the market forces. In the fixed exchange rate, the important thing is that the value of the currency is pretty much stable. So there is no ad hoc change that happens, or suddenly it's going to go down, suddenly it's going to go up. So it's not like it suddenly becomes an exporter's market or an importer's market. There is stability. People would know that, okay, for some time this is what the currency rate is going to prevail. While in floating exchange rate, it is pretty much dynamic. So when you think about that, if fixed exchange rate is so stable, why not everyone move towards it? Because of two reasons. One is that it is applicable only to markets which cannot have a very good, which do not have a very good central banking system and regulatory mechanisms. That's the cause, and the consequence of it is that it does not give you the lever to have your own monetary policy. So for your internal control, for your internal changes of, if you want to affect the inflation in your own country, or if it's deflated, if you want to change that, you want to raise the interest rates, or you want to, reduce those rates or reserves in the country, you can't do that because you are pegged to another currency. Like, for example, if you're pegged to the dollar, you just have to ensure you have enough of the dollars in the reserve to maintain that value of your currency, and you would do anything to drive to that value only. So your internal markets eventually are totally driven by your external stake. That's why you lose your monetary autonomy. While in India's case, or anywhere wherever there is flexible exchange rate, which is in most countries, you do have the autonomy of changing your policies. For example, if there is high inflation, then you go on hearing in the newspapers that RBI might increase interest rates. That's called as monetary policy autonomy. They can increase interest rates through which not a lot of money is going to be pumped in the system because the investments will reduce, and so the inflation is going to come down eventually. But that is not the flexibility that a fixed exchange rate gives you. In a country like China, it is still sort of a feasible option to have a fixed exchange rate to a basket of currencies because they're highly export driven. Their entire economy somewhere is dependent on their exports and not their domestic demand. While in India, it is dependent on its domestic demand, and we are not an export oriented economy. So we need to have all the flexibility to design our monetary policy and fiscal policy that we can get, because our internal markets can be disrupted or affected. If you try and go back to the literature, maybe in one of the videos we will try cover the subprime crisis. In 2008, when the external markets shook badly, India was still sort of in a sweet spot, not that badly affected by what happened because we have a very strong domestic demand and domestic market. That is why we are not too overtly dependent on the external side. And so we were able to sail afloat. But that does not mean we are not internationally connected. We definitely are. Things outside do affect us tremendously. But we are not an export economy. We usually have a trade deficit. So, coming to the next point, what other than the type of exchange rate and the size of the economy affects the currency markets? It's obviously the economic growth prospects. If you see in this is again a world map. The dark greens that you would see are the ones which are showing like really high growth, extremely dark green or dark greens. India is also in a fairly good growth region. That's going to be around like let's say somewhere between 8 to 10%. So is China and multiple other Asian countries like Vietnam. The other countries that you see in the red are the ones who are, probably not showing any growth. And so their prospects, they go low. For example, I mean, if a country is expected to grow really high, there is more confidence, there is more demand for its currency because there are investors that are coming in. They think that okay, this country is growing, put money in here, we'll be getting more returns. So if the external investor is coming to your country, they are going to be demanding rupees instead of US dollar. They'll deposit the US dollar and they'll take rupee. So your currency demand is going to increase. If that increases, then there is an appreciation of the currency. So the simple point is if there are higher growth prospects, then the currency value should appreciate. So then comes the question that what is happening in the country right now because the growth prospects are decent. Like why isn't the currency appreciating then? So then comes the point of relative comparison of the entire bucket of countries that are growing versus the other set of countries that are also growing. I will come and address this point into probably one of the future slides. Yeah, this is the one. Growth of similar other economies. So if you would see in the first graph, it is the developed markets, the developed countries. So what was happening a year or two earlier was that these developed markets were not really growing. Their growth was like somewhere around 0 to 1%. Some were saying that there is a recession as well in Japan. It's not growing at all. Even Germany might be moving towards it. Spain has gone there. So the developed markets were not really growing. In comparison to those, the emerging markets were like the really growth spots. They were like the bright stars in the economy, the world economy. So you take India, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, all these countries, Brazil, Russia, they were growing. Like even if let's say 5%, that is some growth compared to almost 0.5%. So in that case, there was a lot of money being pumped into these economies, more FDI, more reserves accumulating at that time, 2 years back, maybe. So in that case, when more FDI is coming into your country, your currency is more in demand and you would see an appreciation. On the other hand, now that these economies, the developed market economies, especially US, they have started growing. US is showing a growth rate of around 2 to 3%. So when that happens, even if you're growing at 10%, the investor confidence is going to be higher in US because of the sheer size and confidence that the economy gives. They are like nearly 10 times as big as India. And they have got better compliances, better processes, better contract enforceability, regulatory mechanisms. So if anyone is trying to invest into a safe place, they would rather go to US, which is giving some returns now as compared to earlier. So that's where if you bucket these economies and the bucket of developed economies is growing, their currencies will start appreciating. Even when you grow higher, but your base is too low. Like at 2 trillion, even if you grow at like 8%, you will still remain smaller, even if US is not growing at 20 trillion. So if anyone is getting any returns in US, they would just move towards US or Europe or maybe even Japan, but not towards the emerging market. especially when the Turkish crisis is there. So in the emerging markets, there are some countries like, for example, Turkey, that is, facing problems with their debt. So the Turkish crisis is a big topic in itself altogether. The idea that I want to put forth here is that since it's a bucket of emerging markets, if anything happens to one of the countries, the investor confidence dips across these countries that okay, the emerging markets will get affected. So call it as collateral damage. Our country is also part of the emerging markets. India is a part of it. So if the investors are losing confidence in Turkey or maybe Venezuela, which is also an emerging market country, they will lose interest in India as well. That's when the currency again depreciates because they will start pulling back. They will take their money and invest somewhere else. They will move towards the developed markets. So that's where similar economies, what is happening externally, will be affecting your currency even when you are growing. I hope I have right now addressed the point that even when India is growing, why is our currency depreciating? Because the others are not at par with maybe the developed markets. So this will be the last topic of this particular video. After that, we will talk in subsequent lectures, subsequent videos about different mechanisms that affect the currency markets and Turkish crisis and the present crisis in the country. Here I would just outline the intrinsic, the internal factors of an economy that gives a value of a currency, just like the internal factors of a company, as I was telling earlier. One is whether it is import oriented or export oriented. If it's import oriented, then more of imports lead to depreciation of currency because you will be demanding more US dollars in which you will be importing any good. If it's export oriented, then your currency is demanded more for people to export. So there will be a likely appreciation of currency if you would increase on your exports. If there are more FDI inflows, it is a no-brainer. If there is more FDI coming into your economy, your currency is going to be appreciating because there is more demand. So investor confidence, if it is high, there is more demand, more FDI, and more appreciation. And so is the case otherwise. If there are outflows of FDI, then your currency will depreciate. There is no demand for it. Remittances is people who've gone abroad and they're sending money into the country. If more people stay abroad, like more NRIs are there, they will remit more money back to India. So in that case, inward remittances, there is currency appreciation because they will send dollars because they want money, INR, to be released to their parents or whoever is here. So in that case, there is appreciation. If someone is here from an outside country, they send it outside, or they are investing outside of the country while being an Indian citizen. That's an outward remittance. It will lead to depreciation of the currency because they want dollars. There's more demand of dollars and not rupees. They're converting the rupees into dollars. Interest rates. So if there is higher interest rate in your country, like when we talk of the repo rates, the RBI fixes, so there is more inflow because people outside will be coming in, investing in your country. They'll be getting more of interest on it, that the money is going to be used. Same is the case with the US Fed rates that have now reached 3%. During subprime crisis, they were nearly 0%. So no one was getting any returns there. Like 0%, no one is getting anything. So they were investing in different emerging countries. Right now, if US is giving a return, why would they invest into any of the emerging market economies? They would simply not, no matter how high an interest rate that we are paying to them. So that's where interest rates are important. If you have a higher interest rate, there is a likelihood of more investment coming in. If you pay like 8 or 10%, there will be more FDI. So that's where we end for today.